Somewhere in the Skies is brought to you by HelloFresh. Delicious, healthy food delivered to your door and made in your kitchen. Next time you're listening to the show while preparing your HelloFresh meal, visit HelloFresh.ca and use the promo code Somewhere50 for 50% off your first box. Courtesy of your friends at the Antica Podcast Network and HelloFresh. Hey guys, Ryan Sprague here. It is that time of the season again. Peppermint lattes, cozy sweaters, fat man coming down your chimney, whatever it is, I am wishing you a very happy holiday season. So for any of you saucer heads out there, I just wanted to let you know we have got a ton of new designs over at the Somewhere in the Skies store, with many more to come. So why not get that special ufologist or enthusiast in your life something truly unique this holiday season? Visit tpublic.com and search for Somewhere in the Skies. That's teepublic.com. Also, if you're in the holiday giving spirit, the Patreon campaign is up and running and is a huge help to continue and grow the show, both in quality and quantity. With your monthly donations, I can get better equipment and even be able to go on the road to investigate and bring you exclusive content. Speaking of content, there are many rewards being offered for different levels of patronage. So head on over to the Patreon campaign to learn more and to become a patron today. That's patreon.com/Somewhere Skies. And most importantly, for anyone who purchases my book, Somewhere in the Skies, A Human Approach to an Alien Phenomenon, from now until January 1st, 25% of the proceeds will be donated to the Women's Refugee Commission. There are currently almost 60 million refugees and internally displaced persons worldwide who have been displaced by conflict. The Women's Refugee Commission improves the lives and protects the rights of women, children, and youth displaced by conflict and crisis. The Commission are leading experts on the needs of refugee women and children and the politics that can protect and empower them. To support my work and to help an extraordinary cause this season, head on over to Amazon.com and search for Somewhere in the Skies, available both in paperback and ebook. To learn more about this amazing organization, visit womensrefugeecommission.org. Thank you for all that you do for the show and beyond. Let's make this holiday season one we won't soon forget. And with that, let's also get to this week's show.
This is Somewhere in the Skies with Ryan Sprague.
Welcome to Somewhere in the Skies. I'm your host, Ryan Sprague. Every now and again, you come across something that feels like it was made specifically for you. Whether it's a song, a piece of clothing, a craft beer, or even a car, it speaks volumes to you that nothing else can, and it stays with you. About 2 months ago, a few listeners brought to my attention a comic book series that I'd never heard of before. I was hesitant, knowing full well that comics can often be very hit or miss, but I gave it a try. And by the first page, I was absolutely hooked. Arcadia Alvarado, the leading Democratic candidate for President of the United States, says she was abducted by aliens. As the Mexican-American governor of New Mexico, she's dealing with immigration, budget cuts, and an alcoholic ex. She's about to toss her hat into the ring as a candidate for president in the most volatile political climate ever. But then, a lonely road and a nightmarish encounter have left her with terrible, half-glimpsed memories. And now, she has to become president to expose the truth and maybe to save the world. Arcadia's quest is at the heart of this series, written by Paul Cornell and stunningly drawn to life by artist Ryan Kelly. With the help of her quirky staff, Arcadia will pursue the truth of her abduction into danger, mystery, and awe. Saucer Country is a dark thriller that blends UFO lore, an alien abduction with political intrigue, all set in the hauntingly beautiful Southwest. Today, I am speaking with the creator and writer of Saucer Country, Paul Cornell. Paul is a writer of science fiction and fantasy, comics and TV, and one of the only two people to be Hugo Award-nominated for all three media. He's written Doctor Who for the BBC, Action Comics for DC, and Wolverine for Marvel. He's won the BSFA Award for his short fiction, an Eagle Award for his comics, and shares in a Writers Guild Award for television. His latest urban fantasy novel, Who Killed Sherlock Holmes, is now available. With Saucer Country having wrapped in early 2013, Cornell and his entire creative team recently revived the series with IDW Comics with a new title, Saucer State, which chronicles Arcadia Alvarado's journey as President of the United States and her continued search for answers to what happened to her somewhere in the skies, whether she likes it or not. So, without further ado, let's dig deep into flying saucers, abductions, men in black, and the rich mythology of UFOs with Paul Cornell. So I came across your work a few months ago by several suggestions from listeners of the podcast, and I am so happy I did. I bought both volumes of Saucer Country, and I couldn't put it down, Paul. So today...
Oh, lovely. Thank you.
Of course, man. It was refreshing. It was something that I'm so happy I came across. So today we're going to talk all about it, Saucer Country, and also your recently released follow-up, Saucer State. So with me today is Paul Cornell. Paul, thank you so much for joining me on Somewhere in the Skies.
Thank you very much for having me.
So, I mean, like any good comic book, Paul, I'm sure you're well aware of this. I want to start with your origin story. How did your interest in the UFO phenomenon first begin before we even get to Saucer Country?
Well, it was when I was a child, actually. I mean, I grew up being obsessed with space flight. And in the mid-70s, the whole spaceflight thing kind of docked completely with UFO mythology. You know, if you were a kid who was interested in Apollo, you were also interested in Close Encounters when it came along. And I would find in the library weird UFO books. I realized the other day that George Adamski's Flying Saucers Have Landed in a hardback edition was in my school library when I grew up. And my school library was it was kind of this decaying country house. And I think our library was basically the collection of whoever had owned the house before the school came there. And so I got exposed to some extraordinary things as a child. So I would be reading these very scary UFO books under the blankets and scaring myself silly. You know, so I've been inured in this stuff from a very young age.
I can mirror that quite closely, my friend. I mean, there are times where I remember sneaking these books, getting them from my public library, bringing them home, digesting them one by one, bringing them back, getting another one, where you become the UFO person at your local library. So it's quite a label to have for sure. Well, that's really cool. So I guess without giving away too much, could you maybe give us the what we call in the screenwriting world, which again you're quite familiar with, the elevator pitch for Saucer Country?
Well, Arcadia Alvarado, the governor of New Mexico, is about to launch her presidential bid, and on the eve of launching it, she's abducted by aliens. And we always put that in inverted commas because she's never sure of what exactly that was or what it meant. Mm-hmm. And she runs for president. In Saucer State, the current volume, the sequel, she is the president and is trying to use the office to find out what happened. It's a collision between the world of politics and the world of UFO mythology. I think if you come to the book expecting a real alien invasion, then you're going to be disappointed. We're talking about this as a body of mythology, and it's very much slippery. It's about different levels of reality. I always think that the X-Files is strangely detached from UFO mythology. Mm. They brought their own concepts to it almost immediately. I mean, nowhere in UFO mythology do you find their alien bounty hunters with their little weapons that fit into the necks. That's made up of new cloth. That's their own mythology. And so we are right at the heart of this stuff, and using all of the tremendous multi-facets of it, because it's an amazing mythology. It's beautiful. It's multi-layered, and it just covers so much ground. And if anything, oddly, it's underexplored in popular culture, because the Greys basically have just taken over everything. They're like the Beatles of UFO mythology. Everybody's heard of them, but everything else has kind of become more obscure, if anything.
That is a really good point. The rich history behind ufology, I guess we could put it, again in inverted quotes, that there's so much to it. And something like the X-Files, they were very ambiguous. They never named names when it came to actual cases. It was rare if that ever happened. So, yeah, it is interesting and very refreshing to see something like Saucer Country come around that actually uses that rich history, that uses the actual people that were involved in abduction cases or, Project Blue Book, things like that.
Myself and my wife did a tour around New Mexico when I knew I was going to be writing this comic. And it was just a delight to go and see all of these sites, like Sirocco and poor old Roswell. Which it really doesn't want to be that town. And it's managed to confine it to one street. And again, mythologically, Roswell is this little town, and in real life, it's a huge industrial heartland. It's the biggest town for 100 miles. And all of those beautiful places with their resonant names, where one found the romance back in those days. And New Mexico was replete with it, as well as being replete with genuine, space history as well.
Exactly, yes, a rich, deep history, especially for our military. But yeah, that's something that your story covers as well, and we'll definitely get to that. Well, I guess, Paul, what was the impetus for Saucer Country? How did the idea really come about, and how did you get connected with Ryan Kelly on this? I'm interested in the process of that.
Well, Vertigo, I pitched the idea to Vertigo, and they offered me a range of artists, and I was already familiar with Ryan's work from the short-lived DC Comics for Girls line. I can't remember what it was called, Minx, and he did a beautiful book for them, and I just thought, there is somebody who can do the real-life stuff I need to do really, really well. We call it acting. He does good acting. His characters, you can see what they're emoting. And also, we've discovered that he's just amazingly good at the numinous, at the intrusion of the unbelievable into these realistic worlds as well. And that's what you really need for this title, somebody who can do both. And honestly, I can't imagine doing it without him. He's so vital to this book.
I would have to agree. I feel like it is a match made in heaven. There's so many comics out there that feel detached when it comes to the writer and the artist, and it just doesn't mesh. But like you said, that the emotive nature to his art really brings out what you're trying to say with your characters, which easily could become very, forgive the pun, alienated when you're dealing with a topic like this, but it makes it very human. And I think that's what really kept me going. It wasn't even this excitement of reading about UFO history or the UFO phenomenon or abduction phenomenon. It really was this narrative and this main character that you've created. Another huge aspect of Saucer Country, I would say. So,
well, he keeps pulling me into, give more. I mean, Chloe Saunders, the Republican strategist, because he draws her so well and he can do comedy so well, I keep giving her more and more funny lines because I know he'll land them. And, so that's a lovely thing where that virtuous circle is happening,
Absolutely, yeah. And every character is definitely brings something to this entire story. And I think that's pretty awesome. I guess my question in terms of character would be Arcadia. How did the idea come up to have, which we don't see that often, we see it a lot more nowadays, a female lead character in your story, which is very refreshing and long overdue. How did you come up with Arcadia media?
Well, I think I made a wrong bet on the nature of American politics. I thought this is obviously going to be fairly soon what actually happens.
Yeah.
Yeah, we all did, didn't we, mentally? And but I knew that she had to be of Mexican descent because I wanted to talk about aliens. I wanted to talk about the idea of, incursions over the border, of doing that metaphor between, Earth and space and America and Mexico. We flow with that a lot, actually. It's kind of important to her character that, she's two generations from having been a family of illegal immigrants. That at the time the rhetoric was inflamed. Now it's extraordinary. And that was really important. That was right at the start. That was in the first pitch,
Well, in terms of those politics, I'd love to hear a little bit more about what made you want to, Paul, mix politics with the whole UFO question. I mean, we do see this run in tandem throughout UFO history of politics being involved, sometimes good, sometimes bad. So what made you want to cover U.S. politics over maybe another country or something like that?
Well, it's something that's always fascinated me. And one of the things I do quite often is take a bunch of professionals involved in one field and throw them out of their depth into something else. My Shadow Police books are about police and magic. And there was something about, how vulnerable and impotent the UFO phenomena makes us. And I wanted to contrast that with the power of high office to see if any power can be brought to bear against the numinous, against the extraordinary. And because I wanted to talk about UFO mythology, I knew I wanted to talk about New Mexico. And that led to the governor of New Mexico, and that led to the presidential run. And, these things just seem to fit together really well. The fact that a previous governor of New Mexico at the time of Roswell actually figures quite largely into UFO mythology really helped.
Yeah. I think it was a very important part of the book, and we do hear a lot of the time that there are U.S. presidents who have asked this question, like what is going on with Area 51? Who shot JFK? We know Clinton is probably the biggest outspoken one about this. I asked.
Well, during her campaign, when Hillary Clinton mentioned the possibility of disclosure in a positive way, I thought, wow, we're really we're zeitgeisting there, and then we hit a brick wall with that. I don't think actually the comic politically hit a brick wall at all, in that we did predict and actually have followed through on one huge thing, which is Russian interference in American politics, which we got there first with, frankly, and I'm really pleased about that. And it's become clearer and clearer that that's where the title's going, and that was always part of the mix, which is beautiful.
It's always refreshing when an art form can predict future events, for sure.
But no, I didn't expect Trump at all. And now incorporated him in that we've got in Saucer State. It was somebody who looked like a prospective challenger in the future, who is very like him and brings that to the table. I'm a political geek. I'm just really, really interested, and also I respect politicians. I kind of wince at the general tendency to say they're all the same. I really like highly skilled politicians. And until this current one, I would think that virtually every president of the United States has been a reasonable intellectual, somebody who could very definitely hold their own in intellectual debate. Even the ones we tend to think of as stupid. Reagan, for instance, much more intelligent than he's portrayed. And the presidents who asked about UFOs, we go into this a lot in the comic, in a couple of particular issues. In fact, we're going to go there again towards the end. We've got another little history lesson before we finish. But one of my favourite books about UFOs, and possibly the single sanest book about UFOs, is Mirage Men by Mark Pilkington.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes. Well, from from the personal account of his own inexplicable experience to a real look into how much UFO mythology benefits American intelligence. That right back from the 1940s, that we have Freedom of Information request records as to, how many intelligence officers are in the first UFO groups. And there's loads of them. And they're not there to debunk or to observe or to report back. They're there to encourage, because it's much better for them if when people look up, they don't see a U2 but a disc. And I think personally, and spoilers, but it's out there in a factual book anyway. I think personally, and this doesn't really spoil our future story, that it's among the many uses the intelligence community found for this stuff was trying to convince the very credulous Soviet Union, who, would make the occasional little news item about, psychic powers or something like that, mm-hmm. that the US had a crashed flying saucer. And so when Star Wars comes along and Reagan drops that careful hint to Gorbachev about perhaps the two of us will find we're fighting some other power, you guys must have gone crazy in the background, going, oh my God, they really have. That's where they're getting this Star Wars stuff from.
Right.
It actually contributed, I believe, to the end of the Cold War. I think the social idea that the US has had a crashed flying saucer since Roswell is entirely to freak out the Soviet Union. I think that's what it's for. And the fact that the Americans got their own public to believe that, it just really sold the whole bit.
Absolutely. I mean, we have this whole idea, which Mirage Men touches on, of disinformation. When we had Roswell, the first headline in the newspapers was, we captured a flying disc. The next day, nope, it's a weather balloon. Now,
the guy who published that story gets promoted.
Exactly. So right there from the start of modern UFO history, I mean, you have this idea of the military, of the government, using this to their benefit however they can. From a case-to-case basis, I would venture a guess when it comes to UFO crashes or what is seen in our skies that could be threatening national security. It's fascinating to think that the intelligence agencies could say, yep, that's alien. We're going to go work on this over here in the in darkness, and let them think it's aliens, or vice versa. And I think that's what your comic covers as well, too. This constant struggle between what is actually happening to Arcadia and are there aliens actually abducting human beings, or are they not? So
and I will keep that part secret. But I think the multifarious uses made of the mythology. I do believe the story of Reagan whispering to Steven Spielberg, "You won't believe how much of this is true about E.T."
Yes.
I think Reagan did that on mission. I think he was specifically briefed to do that. Because, if you're Spielberg, you're going to tell that to the first person you meet outside the White House, aren't you?
I think so. Those are bragging rights for sure.
Yeah. So, yes, and multifariousness. I think it's the Serpo documents that are meant to have been written by various famous science fiction writers. Mm-hmm. So this is a brilliant mythology, some of which has actually been written by very well-qualified people. It's a tremendous body of work, UFO mythology, and well done there, science fiction writers and the people to whom it actually happened. Because I don't believe these things are mutually exclusive. I think the mythology also includes accounts of people who were mistaken, like Lonnie Zamora. I'm pretty sure saw the future lunar module. Was it?
Yes. That's what I was going to...
I think he saw the lunar module on the bottom of a helicopter before it was declassified. Mm-hmm. What's his name? The Chilean who was meant to have had sex with an alien woman in... what's his name?
I'm also blanking. I'm failing my ufology 101.
But it's pretty clear now that he actually got... he seems to have been... I kid you not, and I use these words realizing how ridiculous they sound. He seems to have been gassed by the CIA. Mm-hmm. And what we have on record are his hallucinations. But anyway, so those guys are mistaken. But I also think some people, whether or not whether or not if we were standing beside them we would have had the same experience, who knows? But I think some other people contributed honest records of things they actually experienced. I'm not about to write off the intrusion of the impossible into the world. At the same time, all this stuff is multifarious and maybe just us glimpsing things that are part of a wider reality that nevertheless do not add up to spacecraft from beyond the solar system, you know.
Very good point, yes. When we're dealing with such a multifaceted, vast phenomenon, the impetus to immediately go to alien is always there. It's so ingrained in us. But I think it's important to ask different questions of what these UFOs could be as well. So I think you do a great job.
Well, it's Jacques Vallée who says UFOs are far too interesting to be just alien spacecraft.
A very good point, yes. Paul, in terms of that, someone like Jacques Vallée, you clearly did your homework when it comes to the mythology. Were there any researchers that you turned to when you started looking into all this? Or was this just an obsession with the literature that's out there?
Yeah, I mean, all my life I've been reading this stuff, so I never really turned to a body of research. I checked on a few things I remembered. Always read 14 times. Actually, I've stopped reading 14 times just in the last couple of months. But I've always been a reader of 14 times. I've read every issue. I've got a sort of vast database in my head of how all this fits together. And so I know where to go to find the research about a particular thing, Making some particular connections. For example, it's actually, you find in the history of science fiction much more stuff about the Shaver mystery and how I remember Lemuria and Ray Palmer, how his extraordinary how his editorial direction of Amazing kind of brought forward all this impossible paranoid stuff into the mainstream in an enormous way just immediately before Roswell, and that whole huge culture of the Deros and the Deros under the earth who are influencing human beings above the earth, and we see their ships coming out of the ground, and those are UFOs. It was huge cultural phenomena that vanished completely and that isn't really talked about very much now, and that's much more recorded in context in the histories of science fiction than it is really in UFO mythology, because it doesn't quite fit with the mythology as later established,
Exactly.
And amazingly, that guy from our mythology, Ray Palmer, his name lives on as a hero of one of DC's. What are they called? The current DC show.
Is it the Legends?
Legends of Tomorrow. Ray Palmer is the Atom, and I'm pretty sure that he's named after that Ray Palmer. Because Ray Palmer, the science fiction editor, is contemporaneous with that character being created.
Perfect. What a perfect Easter egg. I love it. Well, I mean, Paul, you've got someone like Ray Palmer. You've got someone like John Keel. You've got someone like, who is the other guy I'm thinking of? Gray Barker.
Yes.
In terms of the Men in Black phenomenon. Now, this is another, subset that we consider a part of ufology. And I was so happy to see that in Saucer Country, you brought this story up in a very unique way, one I haven't really thought about, one I haven't seen in the stories. And it was very interesting how you handled the Men in Black and what they may actually have been. Would you mind commenting on that?
I grabbed this wholesale from a UFO researcher called Jenny Randalls, who I saw talk at a 14 Times Unconvention, and she did an hour-long lecture purely on the subject of the Men in Black as a USAF hazing ritual. And she came up with all sorts of convincing detail. When this first started, the uniforms they wore and the cars they drove were just what you'd expect from a visit from the feds. And because the rules seem to be set in stone, they stay that way through the subsequent decade. The rules being set in stone like that sort of says somebody's written the rules down there somewhere. And it seems odd for an actual cosmic entity to behave that way. And also, the sometimes they haven't been very good at this, and the rubbish men in black when they show up drop cultural details that just make you laugh and make you go, oh, come on.
Yeah.
Some of them are very good, some of them are a bit rubbish. And she just pointed out how the whole continuum fits with the idea that this is a continuing practical joke that's been kept going over decades in the form of something written down in USAF mess halls.
That would not surprise me one bit, especially like you say. I actually just did an episode on Men in Black where we talked about some of the more ridiculous and bizarre accounts of them. And like you said, the things they would bring up, it's just, it made no sense whatsoever. And again, only I think to further confuse a UFO witness. So fascinating. Yeah, I'm happy to hear that came from someone like Jenny Randles, who I have a great respect for. So that's interesting.
With Keel, as always, I think he's on his own long, strange journey, and I don't think that's what happened to him. But Indrid Cold, I have no idea. It's such a beautiful name. It's such a writerly invention. Whether that's his invention or whether that's an invention of some kind of cosmic trickster, who knows?
Absolutely. It's very poetic. The idea of this grinning man showing up and having a conversation and leaving, it's fascinating, tying into the whole Mothman prophecy as well. John Keel, I do agree with you, is on his own personal journey. Now, whether or not he did witness Men in Black or this singular figure that we've come to know as Indrid Cold, I'm deeply fascinated by that as well. Something maybe we could see in future Saucer State follow-ups. Who knows?
Well, I have an ending plan. That's the thing.
That is the thing, yes.
It's really important to me that, we are still hoving towards this ending that we've had in mind all along. And again, unlike the X-Files, which is a different beast, it's got different aims, it wants to keep going. We know where we've been going, and I know what the last page is. And we are going to answer all our questions and tie little bows around every single mystery. This is really important to me.
Hey guys, I have to interrupt this week's interview for just a moment to remind you once again that Somewhere in the Skies is brought to you by the amazing folks over at HelloFresh. Next time you're listening to the show while making your delicious, healthy HelloFresh meal, be sure to tell a friend about the amazing offer we're currently giving away. By using the promo code Somewhere50, new HelloFresh members will receive 50% off their first box. And trust me guys, I tried 3 of their amazing vegetarian dinners and I was instantly hooked. It's fast, it's easy, and in under a half hour, you have a meal the whole family will enjoy. Consider HelloFresh today by visiting HelloFresh.ca and again, using the promo code Somewhere50, courtesy of your friends at the Antica Podcast Network and HelloFresh. And now, back to the show.
So, it just occurs to me that the strange thing about this mythology is that when somebody who knows them encounters the Men in Black, who is aware of the mythology, nobody ever just puts one in a headlock, slams the door, and calls the papers, do they? I mean, nobody just grabs this stuff and runs.
That's a very good point. You even bring this up in Saucer Country. Why, when you're on the ship, if you're being abducted, just grab something off the table, for God's sake.
Yeah. I mean, that's why I did that scene of Michael where he has his false abduction narrative that's put there by a hypnotist under hypnotic recall, that he actually gets into the business of fighting the Greys, that we have a little Grey doing kung fu and all that. Because honestly, the range of things that you can imagine the Greys doing that aren't hilarious is pretty tiny.
Yeah.
I mean, as soon as they start to do anything but loom ominously, they become fairly ridiculous. And the fact that whenever we do seize a bit of fairyland, whenever it's given to us, like cakes, all this food that aliens give people, and it always turns out to be fairly stodgy recipes with no salt in it. You know, they have extraterrestrial wheat mills there, extraterrestrial flour. You know,
They're not gluten-free, I would assume.
well, they probably have become gluten-free
At
now.
this point, yeah. On a more serious note, Paul, you also bring up another really interesting aspect of the mythology in terms of what I would assume is sort of connected to Project Blue Book, but you have this idea of the Bluebirds Angle in your story. This, black budget, top secret thing going on behind closed doors. I loved it. Possibly being the key word, reverse engineering UFO craft. How did this whole idea come about in Saucer Country?
Well, they used to work for the government, and then they went off into private enterprise all at once. And this came about because I started to read articles about the fact that there were aerospace professionals who were interested in this stuff, who would meet up clandestinely not under any kind of name that would indicate what they were interested in, because they were very afraid of ridicule. I'd also been reading books about, some of which I think were really not good journalism, about aerospace engineers who had found effects which weren't supported in physics. The idea that sometimes engineering can get there first and start developing an effect that's not fully understood. I think it's entirely possible that you could encounter something for which there is not a theoretical background. And the Bluebirds are about private enterprise doing that and running with it. And, of course, they've got this mythological leader who's meant to be still alive, having fought in the Battle of Britain, who's done all the fictional things that, every time somebody says, I was a member of this special ops force who went to get downed UFOs in Cambodia. It turns out we can't find their military credentials anywhere,
Yeah.
He did all that stuff. He was on the moon at the same time as the Apollo astronauts, all those things. But, it's trying to bring all the different aspects together, and I have to have some different plot lines to explore some stuff which go to the places that our heroes can't go,
Absolutely. Well, another big part of that is the folkloric aspect. You have, large sections within the book that comment on this idea of fairies, which I found very interesting. This is a big part of the mythology when you look at someone like Jacques Vallée, who's looked at this very culturally and looked at the evolution of the idea of alien throughout history, from magic to mysticism to what we have today, this idea of the grey.
Well, the way that fairies and aliens map onto each other so completely that they're doing the same cultural things. And also, just for a moment in the middle, European aviators. During at the end of the 19th century, when America was overflown by Jules Verne-style airship that are just a few years ahead of current technology. This is at the time when Zeppelin is just flying prototypes that can't get further than 100 yards in Germany,
Right.
That America's being overflown by these mysterious airships. And people meet the occupants from them all the time. And they are inventors from Europe who swear the locals to secrecy because they're about to go home and apply for their patent. And
As they should.
yes, and then they are by the accounts we have of them are complete. They give their names. And these people cannot be. They cannot exist. And yet there they are.
That's a very good point. Well, I guess, Paul, in terms of the aliens you choose to cover in Saucer Country, we have the Greys and we have the Reptilians, which I thought was hilarious.
And some ancient Nordics.
Yes, we do have the ancient Nordics as well. We have the whole contactee movement, which is something we didn't talk about. But yes, very fascinating, the aliens you choose to involve within this narrative. What made you choose these things?
Goblins.
Oh, you can't forget Hopkinsville. The goblins are one of my favorite stories of all time. When I saw that, almost splash page that Ryan and you decided to do, it was gorgeous. And it was the first time that really the Hopkinsville case really came into full effect for me. I was like, oh my God, I would have been terrified.
I think actually a recent article which talked about mating owls how there are these enormous local owls around there that hang on to each other and flap about in twosomes, being genuinely terrifying on the ground. I do wonder if those poor guys really were besieged by something and it was those owls.
That is a very interesting question, yeah.
But no, I like the vast variety. I especially like the ones that never quite got off the ground. Anybody who meets insect people, they tend to be a one-off. They don't retain their detail between. And that guy from Birmingham who met basically Gandalf and R2-D2.
I know we shouldn't laugh, but come on.
yeah, absolutely. There is nothing inherent but more silly about meeting somebody who's got a copyright on them than than meeting the reptilians. There really isn't. And of course, the reptilians have now become a bit more fashionable than the greys. One thing that's really interesting is that none of this stuff is fashionable anymore. That we're actually getting to the end of UFO mythology. I think unless some new cycle comes along, some new development comes along, it feels like a field that's increasingly talking just to itself. And I think basically the success story of the Greys kind of finished it off. The reptilians are sort of its last gasp, and it's. And what the reptilians bring with them, I mean, the way this whole field has been swinging to the right, from the contactees, which is a fairly liberal movement, all the way to post-cattle mutilation on, we're going further and further into right-wing fantasies and conspiracy theories. And the reptilians are the height of that, this strange equivocation between reptilian aliens and Jewish people, which is abominable. And is sort of the secret language of conspiracy theory. There are those who say reptilian mean reptilian alien, and those that mean perfectly normal people who they don't like very much.
Very good point.
So it's. I wanted to explore the sheer variety, and I love the old Venusians. I love Orthon and all of his Orthon. Isn't that a fabulous name?
I love it.
Well, we have that piece of paper with all the names written and crossed out. Thor. Thoron.
We landed on Orthon, which I think is great. But Paul, that is a very good point, and something I haven't really touched on the show. I don't get political often, but I think what your book does well is bring this idea of the alien forward, not meaning extraterrestrial, but just other. And the idea that we live here in America, no, not just America, all across the world, we live in a very extreme, tension-filled world right now. And like you said, I do see within that small subset of the UFO community or ufology this extreme leaning right now, which is extremely disappointing to someone like myself who is on the younger side, sees a lot of very rational, tolerant young people getting into the UFO field and coming face to face with the reality that it's sort of being run by the David Ickes of the world or things like that, that there's this ambiguous, like you say, reptilian thing that they're going with, which clearly is not alien. It is a small, different race of human being that they're commenting on. This is very fascinating. I think your comic was ahead of the time in looking at that Arcadia is searching for answers to what has happened to her, but at the core of it, it's this idea of people not wanting the other to be here. Exactly.
Yes. And it's UFO mythology is an expression of fear, largely. It's
Absolutely.
Fear of the unknown. It's fear of the other. And it's also an expression of powerlessness. You don't get much more powerless than an abductee. And it also became an expression of the idea that the government is hiding the most wonderful things about the universe. And, I'm quite a fan of David Clarke, the British researcher who went from I mean, I wouldn't call him a skeptic, because there are skeptics who just enjoy laughing at this stuff, and I'm not with them at all. I find that boorish, and actually as true believerish and fundamentalist as anybody who fully buys into one of the conspiracy theories.
Right.
But he's a small S skeptic who basically doesn't think there is anything alien to it, but he's done a huge amount of research into the mythology, and one of the things that he runs with is how the British government seemed to have a genuine interest for a while, set up a desk to, record instances of people encountering UFOs, gathered this stuff for a long time, and then just basically got bored and, filed it all away and stopped having the desk and laid everybody off. And, it's kind of the opposite of the response you'd expect if there was anything to it. They seem to have become convinced that there was nothing there.
Well, yeah, and I mean, that's something that I think your main character is searching for as well, where she's searching for an answer to what may have happened, but, maybe it's not what we all expect. We've had so many projects here in the U.S. that have looked at the UFO phenomenon, and they all eventually fizzle, whether that's due to finances or what, but you do have to wonder,
Well, I think it's because the interest here is not in nuts and bolts. Issue 5 of Source Estate is an issue that involves a lot of quotes from somebody I'm very fond of, the writer Jeffrey Kripal, who is a historian of religion who takes UFO mythology seriously as he does any other religion he writes about. And his view on it is tremendous. And very, very refreshing, and treats people who've had these experiences very fairly, I think. And you go away from him feeling that the bounds of reality do sometimes fray at the edges. He points out how writerly the phenomena is, how like a body of fiction, but that doesn't actually make sense either, in that there are all sorts of coincidental and beautiful and poetic links with the things that have happened across UFO mythology, which seem to imply structure and reason and purpose. But, unless there has been a single team of writers show running this thing from the 1940s until now, that's just not possible under the rules of reality as we know them,
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think that, someone like Kripal brings up a good point that this is more about us than it ever is about whatever is out there. It is us shining a mirror on ourselves.
His brilliant quote about the idea of a UFO without an observer is ridiculous.
Exactly. Yeah, the whole tree falling in a forest. I love it.
Yeah.
In terms of the idea of what the government might know, Paul, what do you personally believe? Are aliens visiting the planet? Does our government know anything about what's going on?
Well, I think the governments of the Western world I think they think they've made it up entirely. I think that at the highest levels of the intelligence community in the States, those who are concerned with this stuff, they pretty much think that UFOs are their baby, that this is something they wrote. Do I think aliens have ever visited Earth? Maybe once or twice. Maybe this is a huge cargo cult. Mm-hmm. Maybe it touched the Earth once and we reacted so hugely that we created a religion around it. I have some time for Barney and Betty Hill. I think they are either great American writers and amazing mythologists who basically put together huge strands of this mythology out of nothing. I'm a huge fan of The Outer Limits. People who talk about Barney and Betty Hill's experiences in relation to the episode of The Outer Limits that had gone out the previous week, which is an episode called The Bolero Shield. As a huge fan of The Outer Limits and a follower of UFO mythology, all the time I was growing up, I never associated those two things, and I still don't. I think it's an enormous stretch. The Bolero Shield has no narrative elements that play into the UFO mythology. The only connection is that these are aliens that have rather wraparound eyes, and they don't look very much like the Greys, honestly. They really don't. And also, there's no proof that Barney and Betty Hill ever saw it. And the Outer Limits at that point, not a very big show, not rating very well. So blowing that out of the water, I think they seem to have come up with, either through it happening to them or through pulling just amazing things out of the collective unconscious under hypnosis. And the fact that details of their experience were edited out of the later mythology. The little guys they meet are in uniforms with caps, like the biker in the Village People.
Right.
That gets edited out because it feels silly.
Yes.
And Betty's star map, the way that seems to relate to... I know it's been debunked, but again, she actually saw something and drew it, and there's all sorts of little features which seem genuinely... They have veracity to them. They feel like they could be real. And that applies to almost nothing else in the literature. I think something interesting happened to them. We may never find out what. Maybe that's not the 1 or 2 points where the alien arrived. I sort of think maybe they were here briefly and then went away again. It's vaguely possible. Some film you see, almost no photographs, but some video is more convincing. I don't think there are any good UFO photographs, honestly. There aren't even really many good fakes, even.
Good point.
But that recent collection by Jack Womack, Flying Saucers Are Real, which basically contains every memorable photo from one's childhood. There's nothing in there that really makes you go woo. Maybe once or twice.
Yeah.
Maybe once or twice. Or maybe even it's just a flyover, or the stealth technology was good enough so that we never really noticed very much.
I tend to agree with you. I've never come down hard, even as a UFO quote-unquote researcher, of when you get asked that question, it's so hard to answer. I feel like the most clear, concise answer you can ever give is, I don't know. Yes,
absolutely. Absolutely.
It speaks volumes.
When you look deeply into something like Rendlesham Forest, and it just falls apart like a wet card house. And so many of these cases are like that they require belief,
yes.
to keep going.
Yes, it's a struggle we have all the time, belief versus fact within the UFO field for sure. But
when you listen to the Rendlesham tapes, and the voices on them are bored, still looking at this light in the sky, like we have. These guys are not going through a great transcendent experience, are they?
That's a good point. And then often the audio we do hear, whether it's on a documentary or whatnot, are the one small moments where something out of the ordinary does happen, and that's what we always hear. Very good point.
If you're observing a light in the sky on the horizon for several hours, I tend to suspect that might be something astronomical in nature.
Yes. Maybe a lighthouse, maybe not. We'll never know.
Yeah.
Well, sort of wrapping things up, Paul. So I'm sure, like you and many of your readers, they were disappointed when Vertigo decided not to continue Saucer Country, but we've sort of hinted at what is coming right now. That is Saucer State, the new version with IDW. Can you tell us a little bit about what we can expect with this new? Is it a 12-issue run?
It's a 6-issue run initially.
Okay.
Then the last issue of that comes out just before the turn of the year in late December. There's a gorgeous new IDW complete edition of the original Saucer Country in one volume, where I've taken the opportunity to fix a few errors, like, move speech balloons that were pointing to the wrong person, all that. And Saucer State will be collected early in the new year, in those 6 issues. And then we're going to pause a bit to let Ryan Kelly recover for a while. And then we are going to finish it in... we're still discussing what the form of that might be, whether it'll be individual issues, whether it'll be one volume. We're not sure, but then there will come the conclusion. The conclusion will be roughly 4 to 6 issues long, but it might be in one volume.
Perfect. Oh, well, that's very exciting to hear. I'll take whatever I can get with it, man. Well, I mean, I've been looking over your resume, Paul, after I discovered Saucer Country, and you've worked on some pretty extensive properties. And this is a question, sort of throwing you a curveball here, but something like Saucer Country and Saucer State is completely yours. You created this from start to finish. What I kind of want to know before we leave here is, what is it like as a writer working on a completely original project versus a pre-existing world, a franchise that everyone knows that you're sort of diving into? What do you find most rewarding about either one of those?
Well, I got the opportunity when working in other people's worlds to deal with characters I'd always wanted to write. Your Doctor Who's and your Marvel characters. And that's a great pleasure. But I've started to feel in recent years that that's fun, and the serious work, the stuff that I really want to do, lies in original characters. So I'm pursuing that much harder now. Yeah, it's sort of a mixed diet, a varied diet. You want to do a bit of one and a bit of the other. I've just been amazingly fortunate to be able to wander about, sort of being a bit of a dilettante and just sort of having fun and doing bits here and there. Now I've made my big decision to only work on my own characters. The universe mocks me. As soon as I said that on Twitter, an hour later, Titan Comics announced they'd got the rights to Dan Dare. And part of me went, could you not have waited a day?
Come on. Oh, God bless Twitter for all its good and bad, for sure.
But, I really love Dan Dare, and I would really have wanted to do that. And but I just ruled myself out beforehand.
Hey, there's, we live in a world where you can always go back on your word, my friend.
Well, I may be doing that soon. There's one last thing. No, I can't talk about that yet.
That's fair.
But no, I'm loving Saucer Country and Saucer State, and I think it's sort of it's my big story. It's my sort of central work. I mean, my most autobiographical work is my horror novel Chalk. But this is the one I really want to land and to finish. And I'm amazed that we got IDW, because Chris Ryle of IDW is such a UFO buff. He was the big factor in bringing us over there. And to their credit, DC were very cooperative in giving the rights back to us. So, it's been delightful all in all.
That's great. Well, now I know another guest I'm going to turn to now, so thank you for giving me that name over at IDW.
Oh, yeah, Chris Ryle, I'm sure he loves conversations like this.
Oh, that's great. Well, you mentioned Chalk. What else do you have on the creative side coming up? Is there anything you can talk about right now?
Let me see. My Lichford books, starting with Witches of Lichford, continue at Tor.com Publishing. I've got all sorts of things that it's going to be a busy year for me, but this is the sort of point of the year where you can't talk about anything.
That's completely fine.
No, this year it was Chalk and Lichford, and I've just finished a run on Vampirella for my old friend Matt Iddleson, who was the editor at Dynamite, and yeah, that's about it right now. But,
I think that's plenty, for sure. Well, Paul, where can we find Saucer State and more about what you're up to?
Well, you can find Saucer State in all good comic shops or on Comixology digitally, and you can find the collected Saucer Country from IDW there as well. And you can find out all about me on paulcornell.com or Paul_Cornell on Twitter.
Perfect. Well, Paul, I can't tell you how happy and giddy I was to have discovered your work. Probably much later than I should have. But, now I eagerly await every issue of Saucer State. It's interesting. We live in such a fast-paced, binge-consuming world now. It's refreshing, again, to wait for something to come out. I think that's very important. It really helps the reader and the writer in the creative side and the consuming side, especially when it's something as close to my heart as UFOs. So,
well, thank you.
Of course.
And I'm really glad. I'm really glad we've tuned into something there for you. Thanks very much.
My pleasure. Thank you again for bringing Arcadia and Company out. I think it's an incredible story. I can't wait to see where it's going and how it's going to end. I think that's very exciting. So thank you again for joining me on Somewhere in the Skies.
Thank you.
All right, that is it for this week's episode. I have to thank Paul again for coming on. Again, the newly released series, Saucer State, can be found on Comixology or through idwpublishing.com. For a complete list of Paul Cornell's work, be sure to visit him at paulcornell.com. If you haven't already, please take a moment to subscribe, rate, and review Somewhere in the Skies on iTunes. This is the largest platform for podcasts, and the more subscribers we get, the more visible the show becomes to new listeners. We're on Twitter at Somewhere Skies, Instagram at Somewhere Skies Pod, and to make any topic and guest suggestions, to read bonus articles, and to submit your own UFO sighting and encounters, please contact me through the website, somewhereintheskies.com. I'll see you here next Monday. And remember, keep your feet on the ground, but never stop searching somewhere in the skies.
Somewhere in the Skies is produced by Third Kind Productions in association with Antica Productions and the Antica Podcast Network. To learn more, visit anticaproductions.com.
Hey, this is Paul Bates, one of the cast members of Illusionoid. Join us each week as we improvise an audio adventure and transmit dire warnings from the future as part of the Antica Podcast Network. And don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at IllusionoidPod. Should I have said at IllusionoidPod? You get it.